Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
I've always wondered about this. When you hire a coach, leadership, business, a personal coach, whatever it might be, to move your life forward and attain your goals, is the coach giving you advice, or are they coaching you, or is it the same thing? Let's dig into that today and so much more. She works with all different individuals, from executives to C-level suite people, just business owners, or those that just want to move their life forward. She has a long history working in the legal field as well, and she's back with us. Margaret Enloe is on the program. Hey, Margaret, how you doing today?
I'm good, Steve. I'm doing just fine. It's a little cold here in New York City, but I think a lot of states or cities are experiencing that. So have to bundle up when we go out, but otherwise, not too hard.
My gosh, it's about 19 degrees in New York, and I just talked to somebody in Calgary where it is, and I had to double check and do the conversion from Celsius to Fahrenheit. It's minus 19. Minus 19. We have plus 19.
Yeah, plus 19 and we're freezing, right?
Got to be thankful for what you got. Before we even dig into this, I want to share that I'm with a men's group, and I've shared that before. But whenever a man is giving details about a situation, we always say we don't give advice. We do not give advice.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And there's been times where somebody is presenting something, and then a man in the group would say, well, you know what, blah, 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 and others say, whoa, wait a minute there. We don't give advice. Does a coach give advice?
In a pure sense, no. I think it does happen that advice is on occasion given by a coach, but the essence of it, which sounds like your men's group, is to ask questions of the client when you're coaching them so that they on their own think about things that on their own they might not, so that they're coming up with their own thoughts, ideas, feelings, attitudes, ways they can accomplish things, what they can do, because the thought is, and I think there's a lot of validity to it, Steve, if it comes from them, then it's much more likely to have the right impact and be effective for that client. As you mentioned, I was a lawyer for many years. I still have my legal license. And we're talking over 30 years. So I had a lot of time advising people. It was part of what I did. That was my job. So switching into coaching, it is, yes, it's a big transition, but I certainly see the different roles, being a lawyer advising somebody versus being a coach and helping them think through what it is they think they need to do or want to think about, or how they feel about things.
Therein lies your experience and professionalism, because you need to look at it from different angles and ask those different questions so that the client can derive what is their own answer. And I've said this a million times before, and I believe it. We all know the answer. Anything you need to know, you already know it. It's inside of you.
It's inside of you.
Use your intuition, use your gut feeling, whatever it is. Is it easy to hear it? No. Say that again. No, it's not. And sometimes we get a little bit better at hearing our intuition and hearing the answer. And that goes right down to what you want for dinner. Your body knows. Your body is saying, no, I don't want that. I don't want carbs tonight. But your brain is saying, let's have carbs. It knows, but you need to listen. But on the coaching level, you present it in different ways so that we can think it out and see it in all different camera angles, as you will, and then derive the answer. And I think that I wouldn't even know how to do that, to be honest. To ask questions from what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? I'm not a coach.
But in your men's group, since you're not supposed to give advice, are you, Steve, thrust into the role from time to time of being a coach for somebody else?
In a loose way, yes. And you try to remember to ask questions.
Yeah.
And it's I'm going to say it's challenging, because we all want to give our opinion, based on our experience. And there are times where somebody may be dealing with something, and I may have dealt with something similar, never the same. We're all different people. I'll
Right.
never know, your life. You won't know mine, but something might resonate. And right away, I'm like, and I got to stop myself
Yeah.
because I want to say it. But I remember the time I had to deal with that, and it could even be a legal situation. But, I dealt with that. An attorney told me to, but it's like, no,
Not
no,
here, not
no.
here. I will say, Steve, because it is an important distinction and a question that I do say to my clients, because of my significant legal background, advising people on things, if I don't hear you, my coaching client, think about something, articulate something, have an idea about something that I think is therefore maybe missing the boat on something that could be useful to you, my client, I will ask questions to help them perhaps see something that on their own they might have trouble seeing or thinking about. I don't
Hmm.
want my vast experience as a lawyer to just be, well, that's not relevant. In many, many ways, it's very relevant, especially when I'm coaching lawyers. So I want them in to when I think it's useful to them to get the benefit of my experience. And so the difference might be a client says a few things about what they think they want to do. And I said, and they've told me maybe 5 minutes of things that they're thinking about doing, attitudes. And I said, well, would it be helpful to you, Dave, to just
Mm.
hear a little reflection that I have based on what you've told me? And I've never had a client say, no, I'm really not interested. They always are appreciative of that insight or what I might say. So, in saying it, I invite them first to say, well, yes, I would like to hear what you think, Margaret. And then, secondly, talk about it in a way that doesn't sound judgmental, doesn't sound like, hey, how come you didn't think of this?
Hmm.
Uh, that leads them in a, let's say, more gentle, soft way to think about and say, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that, Margaret. That might be good. To which I, as the coach, might say, well, why, Dave, do you think it would be good for you in this circumstance? See, that's very different from me telling somebody, Dave, you've told me all these things, and I really would advise you in light of that to make sure you do A and B and C. That's a very different dynamic. But if you peel back the onion a little bit, you might say, well, that's a way, Margaret, for you to give advice so that it's heard and absorbed in a different way than if I were giving it to a client in my legal capacity. So,
I heard you say something, and it's important to repeat this, for even just for the rest of us, advising a friend, family member, whatever it is.
right?
You need to ask them if they want either your advice or, your view of it.
Yeah, it's good if
It
you
needs to
do.
be it needs to be invited instead of you just purging it out there and,
Yeah.
acting like the know-it-all.
I got you. But it's very hard to do. Let's say you're talking to a
Yes.
friend, you know this friend for 10 years, and they're doing something in your view that's kind of stupid. Well, you're, as your friend, much more likely to say, hey, Dave, I can't believe you're thinking of doing that because blah, 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 something, right? And that comes out very naturally when you're talking to a friend. If you're
Yep.
talking, let's say, to a spouse, it might be a little different. I had a conversation with my daughter, for example, recently, and based on what she was dealing with, I could tell right away. I said a few things to her and I said, hey, I'm not your coach here. And she said, I know you're not. I'm like, I'm mom. I'm talking to you as your mom. And she was fine with that. And I was giving her more my 2 cents, so to speak, about how she ought to handle a difficult situation. I never, ever would have talked to her like that had she been my client.
When somebody comes before you as a client, how much do you go into their past? Now, I think we've identified that coaching is vastly different than therapy, and a lot of times therapy keeps bringing up the past in
Mhm.
order to help you move forward. Coaching, not so much. It's more now and the future. But
Mhm.
does the past come into play?
The short answer is definitely yes. A person is where they are in great part because of their past. The focus, though, as you mentioned, is much more in absorbing that and then helping them think through what are they going to do next or what are they going to do about it. Because people can dwell in the past ad nauseum and not do anything with it. But having said that, I always, as a coach usually in the first meeting, Steve, want to get some download from my client about their past. And I don't, I talk about it in the context of family, important friends in their lives. Oh, and then when I talk to them, well, why is this person, and how is this person an important person in your life? They're going to talk about the past. I met them in college, and they were somebody I met in my first day of work, and they were a mentor, whatever it is. So history, of course, has a role in understanding where the client is now, and you cannot divorce the present from the past, but you don't have to dwell in the past. And I'm not even saying therapists dwell in the past beyond what they should, but it is a different emphasis.
And I get that. Always transparent. I had a therapist about 20, no, I'm sorry, like 13 years ago-ish. And we engaged this therapist, we'll call it like 4 years ago. And he served his purpose then. Now I wasn't feeling it so much because he was focusing a lot on the past, and he would always focus on current logistics. But I would get a therapist because I'm dealing with emotions and feelings instead of, so how's the legal case going, or things like that, logistics. And I think the therapist is more, dealing more with emotion. And I want your feedback on that versus a coach would be looking at, that's the person that should be looking at the logistics and what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to move forward in your life. Your thoughts on that?
I think fairly often, Steve, in coaching meetings, I am curious about how a person is feeling about something. And it's a very natural thing if they describe a difficult situation they're faced with to then say, not all the time, but so how did that conversation make you feel? And it's not something where or rather it is something I'm interested in as a coach, but with that information about how somebody feels, it's like, okay, in light of you're feeling pretty discouraged, having talked to Dan about your project, what are some steps that you now might take to deal with that? That might be a logical follow-up question in light of their emotions around something. Whereas I don't want to presume what I know what a therapist might do, but I will not dwell at length in somebody's emotions. I mean, hey, I've had clients that cry. This is not uncommon. And if they're crying, obviously you've tapped into some emotion that they're experiencing, and it may be because you've asked the right question. You've gone a little deeper than the friend would go. You've triggered something. And as a coach, that's viewed as a good, it's not like, oh, it's good versus bad, but it's like, that's fine. You're there to help them through that.
Yep.
Understand it, not reject it, not to hand them a Kleenex and say, oh, I'm so sorry, did I ask you the wrong question? No, you would never do that as a good coach. But you'd say, okay, I see that. Can you tell me a little bit more about where you think that emotion is coming from? So you see, if somebody's crying, and I've had that quite often.
Sure.
I want to pursue that a little bit.
Well, I'm not going to think that it's a bad thing if somebody cries, because to me, there was a breakthrough.
Yes.
Something came to light that they connected with. They had a realization, maybe a trigger, and now we're working to move forward using that as insight for the client, not necessarily for the coach.
Sure, for the client. And the insight might be based on or rather the trigger might be based on a simple thing like, well, when was the last time that, if you can remember, that you felt the same way? And it's going into the past, or it could be something much more, gee, I see this is quite emotional for you. What is it you think that triggered that? You see, so you want to get some understanding for them, but crying is you never want to like tamp it down and say, "Oh, I'm sorry." No, we won't talk about that anymore. I'm sure a therapist wouldn't do that either.
Of course. No, but um, it's those things are going to come up because you're dealing with life.
Mhm.
You're dealing with change too. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Everything that we're talking about here is to change somebody's life, change their situation. Change is scary. Yeah, it's why we don't change as often, or we're kind of afraid of it. So I would imagine emotions are going to come up.
Emotions do come up. Yeah. And it's also a sign that the client is comfortable enough with you as the coach to cry. They're not repressing it there. So it's a sign of, hey, the dynamic between you and your client is good.
Mm. What do you most often hear from people you work with?
Hmm. That's interesting. Most often here.
Now, what are they telling you that they're dealing with? What are, the every situation is different. Every coaching situation is different. Nothing cookie cutter here. But
I'll tell you what it is.
go.
I'm having trouble with X. And what is that? X job. Somebody at the job. They
Okay.
don't like, I'm having trouble with my career. I'm having trouble because I was just let go. I'm having trouble because I'm making a difficult transition into retirement. I'm
Mm,
having trouble with, you see, so I think that might
yeah.
be at the core something I hear fairly often. What the trouble is a big range of things. So because I
Well,
deal with people in transition, then a lot of times the trouble is some aspect of that transition. So,
mm, which what's another word? Change.
hey, yeah, there you go.
You
Yeah.
left a job. That's a change. You have a challenge with a coworker. Um, Something has changed or something needs to change in order for that to be a situation that you can tolerate, right? Um, hmm. Why are we afraid? Why are we so afraid of change?
I think it's because it is going to something new. And anything that's new is you're unsure about it or not so clear about it.
The
It's like
unknown.
the expression, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. So I'll just stick with this bad boss. I'll stick with this bad career. I'll stick with this job, this relationship, because I know what it is. I know what to expect with it. And a lot of times people stay in difficult, toxic situations
Mm,
because they're afraid of what the new thing might bring to them. So it's a natural phenomenon. It's not something to criticize anybody for. But if somebody is so unhappy that they're reaching out to you, they probably at some level they want to make the change, but they need some help making that change. And that's where you as a coach can come in and help them glide or move through. Move through might be a little better because there are always hiccups in change, move through to make that change so that they're not as afraid of it. I said to somebody recently, what's the worst thing that can happen if you have a bad conversation? Well, I guess I could get fired. Okay, so the worst thing that could happen is you get fired. What might happen if you got fired? Well, I might have a lot more time to do other things that actually I've been wanting to do. So you put the worst thing that can happen in the context, you put it out there, and then very often the worst thing that could happen is often not so bad. And then they can say, oh, well, that's the worst thing. It's probably not likely to happen. So it makes it easier for people to move in a direction that they're a little fearful of.
and I totally agree with you on all of that. One thing, and I want your feedback on this. I've tried to reframe the way I say things or internalize things. And I've tried to get away from saying, what's the worst that could happen? Or if somebody says, well, it could be worse.
Mhm.
Because in my mind, and our subconscious is everything. It's been said like 90% of what we do is the subconscious. We're only 10% conscious, if you will. You're telling your subconscious worse. It doesn't know. It's kind of stupid. Wants to help you, wants to support you. Doesn't really know the difference between the good and the bad. So it hears, you know, could it could be worse, be worse, be worse, and then you could just your subconscious could say, "Oh, he wants it to be worse. Let me work on that for you. I'll
Let
get
me
right
work
back
on
to
that
you."
one. Yeah, let me get it to worse.
Yeah.
I think, Steve, in the context of what I'm talking about, saying that out loud, what's the worst thing that could happen? It's very concrete, and it gets a client to really think about what is the worst thing. So in that context, because you're looking for something that helps them
Yep.
articulate the worst thing, they put it on the table. It's there. It's there for them to face. And in doing that, it's like, oh, so that's what it is. Can you deal with that? And so it's very proactive dealing with
Sure.
it instead of kind of like pretending we're trying
Oh
to
no,
get.
I get you. I'm totally right there with you.
Okay.
And maybe I'm overthinking it in terms of the language, that's used. But my thinking, for me is if I could present it to my mind in a slightly different way, maybe it'd be better. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, we all know that positive thinking
Yeah.
is generally a better way to go.
Sure.
Glass half full, people have it much easier than glass half empty people. And
Yeah.
thinking positively about what could happen, yeah, it's a really great thing if you can get there. And some people just do it more naturally than other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Um, Good. I'm glad we looked at this today with the advice situation. I honestly didn't even know how to answer that
Oh,
coming
really?
from how you would answer it. I didn't even know how you would frame that in terms of the coaching side. Um, and I give you a lot of respect because you have to be trained in your mind
Yeah,
to look at things, to show somebody different ways to look at things.
right, right.
I don't think it just comes naturally. Oh, well, okay, let me do that for you. No, I think that's the way you think because I don't know that I could. I don't know that I could give somebody the different, I'll give them my advice. That's not what I want to do because it's
Right,
easy.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
but
right, right.
but looking at it from different angles allows us to really, it's almost as if it's coming from us. You're just helping us.
Yes,
Yeah.
helping a
You're the
client.
guardrails. You're the guardrails on the highway.
And sometimes people can trip off in other strange directions. It's like, well, how about if we get back to talking about this decision that you came into the meeting wanting to make?
Yep.
And all, right? If they can go off on they start talking about something totally irrelevant. But the other quick thing I wanted to mention here, Steve, is that in talking about, let's say, talking about things through my experience, I want my clients to get the benefit of my experience, but not to project it onto them and say, well, I had this situation, this experience. No, no, no. It's listening to what the client is going through and their experience, from which you say, yeah, I know in my head, I had that experience. And so you articulate something, you talk about something, but you don't refer to your own experience because your experience is really irrelevant to them.
It's so true.
It's
It's so true.
irrelevant.
Irrelevant. And I even try to do it with my daughter, 16. And I
Yeah.
even preface it by saying, we're both different. Your life now is different than mine then. However, I just want to share something. And I feel like as a parent, I have to say it. You know, there's a
All right.
connection, but,
Yeah.
I feel like I have to say it, but I have to qualify before
Hey,
because,
that's wonderful that you do qualify because a lot of parents don't do that.
well,
And
guess what? Our parents did it. I remember when I was your age. I don't want to be that parent.
they
Margaret,
don't.
how do we find you? What's the best way to engage you?
See, there are two best ways to engage me. One is through LinkedIn, Margaret Enloe, find me there. And second is on my um, website, which is margaretenloe.com. Lots of
What
Margaret Enloes there.
wonderful talking with you, Enloe, Enloe, Margaret spelled as it sounds. Great talking with you. Thanks for all the insight on coaching and advice. And I appreciate it. We'll get together. Aren't you going away?
Not till early February. I'm going.
February.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. We'll talk next time. Thanks again.
All right. Bye, Steve. Thank
We'll be
you.
right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the mytuner-radio, online radio box, and simpleradio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.